No continent globally has borne the brunt of sanctions by the United States, the European Union and the United Nations like Africa. Both the UN and the EU are multilateral organizations. But the US in most instances acts unilaterally, pursuing its own geostrategic interests.
What we have are unilateral sanctions regimes that don't have very clear exit strategies. They don't have clear benchmarks or indicators for their own success.
Currently, the US has targeted individuals and companies in at least 9 African countries, among them the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan and Zimbabwe, whose sanctions date back 2 decades. The US says its sanctions against Zimbabwe target specific government officials and entities it accuses of undermining democratic institutions or processes. But Zimbabwe's current president says the sanctions have devastated his country's economy, imposing a huge burden on ordinary people.
My country's citizens have fallen victim to this indiscriminate weapon of mass destruction.
The Office of Foreign Assets Control under the U.S. Department of Treasury is responsible for administering sanctions. It deploys instruments such as the blocking of assets, travel and trade restrictions made possible because of its influence on the global financial system. The latest African countries to come under the threat of U.S. sanctions are Sudan over the country's current conflict and Uganda after a new LGBTQ law came into force. In a statement released by the White House on Uganda on the 29th of May, U.S. President Joe Biden warned the U.S. was considering additional steps, including the application of sanctions and restriction of entry into the United States against anyone involved. Uganda's president has shrugged off the threat.
If they interfere with our trade, we shall trade with others.
According to experts, for sanctions to be effective, the U.S. should adopt a different approach.
It should do away with its bilateral or a unilateral approach towards sanctions and try and move this into a more multilateral domain and seek the legitimacy and credibility provided to it by the United Nations, by other multilateral bodies.
Such a move, experts say, would make the sanctions more effective and credible. But with the US being the most influential member of the global community, it's highly unlikely and it will continue to act unilaterally. But for Africa to deal with the unintended consequences of sanctions, experts say it must engage in proper diplomatic lobbying. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.